Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses again. It's show number 89. It's Sunday the 22nd of November, and here in London we have a fairly crisp morning, but it's bright and sunny at the moment, so let's hope it stays that way. I fancy getting out and go for a walk in a minute. Right, what have we got for you today? Well, quite a lot actually. Rishi Sunak is considering road pricing. Is time up for cheap electric power. Second lockdown doesn't reduce traffic as dramatically as the first. London is to join the nationwide e-scooter trial. Yamaha have killed off their long-running E6, which means it's the end of an era. Today's better biking tip will conclude with some advice on riding in fog, so stay tuned for that. Grab yourself your brew, settle down, and you're ready to join me for Elevenses Live. Kevin Williams here, and we're here every Wednesday and Sunday at 11. All right, okay, just a quick reminder for those of you who are missing the online pilgrimage, or the annual pilgrimage, I should say, to the NEC, that it's gone online and it opened yesterday. And today, if you tune in, there are exclusive new metal videos from Honda, Triumph and BMW featuring some new machines. So that's what's going on at the Motorcycle Live online. Right, okay, so first story about road pricing. Well, for many years I've been pointing out that the fairly obvious flaw in the widely touted cheap driving benefit of electric cars is the fact that taxes on fuel are a big source of revenue for the government. It was blindingly obvious, really, that cheap electricity for driving was only ever going to be a transitional benefit, and that sooner or rather than later the government was going to have to start taxing that electricity. With the latest news that petrol and diesel engine vehicles are due to be phased out within the next decade, the loss of revenue from fossil fuels as drivers switch to electric vehicles promises to leave a huge black hole in government finances. It's been put at no less than £40 billion. Now, for a long time, the way forward looked like it was going to be smart meters. They've been presented as an environmental and power-saving initiative, but the key word is that they are smart. They can tell you how many showers that you've taken. They can tell when you're cooking. They can tell when you're in or out of the home, and they can tell when you plug in your electric car. So one way that the revenue could be replaced would be differential tariffs. One tariff for sort of ordinary electricity and another one for charging your electric car. However, the smart meter rollout hasn't gone as smoothly as was planned. The voluntary take-up has been less than enthusiastic by many people. At the moment, there are around 15 million smart meters in the UK. And there was actually a rollout plan for this year, which was due to go ahead with some government funding to encourage people to take them up. And that's been put back now to 2024. So the plan to have 53 million smart meters in homes around the country is not going to happen for the foreseeable future, at least. And the meters themselves have proven problematic. One issue that's cropped up regularly is that when you switch in supplier, the meter becomes dumb. So it's perhaps no surprise that Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, is reported to be very interested in an alternative way of raising money with electric cars, and that's basically to go back to the old idea of road charging. Not surprisingly, many people aren't very keen on that as an idea, and one of the most prominent is AA President Edmund King, who has reportedly described road pricing as a poll tax on wheels, and he's also suggested that naming motorways after football teams would be more popular than introducing this mileage-based program. What can I say about that? Well, he's conveniently forgetting, of course, that we're already charged on a mileage basis simply because we pay duty on petrol and diesel, and so however many miles we travel, with the proviso that fuel consumption matters, we're already paid by the mile. Mr. King has urged the government to come up with a more imaginative solution, and he says that road pricing's considered on a regular basis every 5 years since 1964. And he continues that whilst the push towards electric vehicles is good for the environment, it's not good for the exchequer, and that the government can't afford to lose 40 billion from fuel duty when the electric revolution arrives, indeed. But what he proposes is a more imaginative solution, and his road miles scheme would offer every driver 3,000 free miles, with 1/3 more for those living in rural areas because they have to drive further, and then a small charge thereafter. I'm not quite sure why, given that, as I said, we pay duty on every litre of fuel we use, why we should suddenly get 3,000 free miles just because we're switching to electricity. A rather more imaginative idea is commercializing the roads via an adopt a highway scheme with commercial naming rights. So he was suggesting that roads could be adopted by brands like major retail companies or even football clubs. Right, okay, now don't forget that I am still taking bookings for the year. Let me just get my image viewer up and running. There we go. I'm obviously trying to recover some lost income, and any help on that is much appreciated. So I'll be working right through the winter with my new COVID adapted courses, limiting training to on-road sessions that are only 2 hours long, and all the theory and debriefing happening online. It does mean that what I can do is pick and choose good days, and we can start at 12 noon. Which gives morning fog a chance to clear, and also gives the roads a bit of a chance to dry out, but without finishing too late in the afternoon either. Those courses are priced at £180 a day, which is quite a big saving, £55 down on last year's prices, just because we're doing the work online. So if you're planning to ride to work, you can look at my courses. I'm going to be taking bookings from 3rd of December, so I'm now open for bookings again from 3rd of December. Don't forget, I have starting points in Bucks, Hart, Surrey, Essex, Northwest London, Southeast London. If you can't make it for an on-road session, why not look at my online coaching as well? Just £20 an hour while you stay warm and dry and learn better biking skills. And of course, there is the survival skills weather guarantee. I can't make the sunshine, but I can make sure we don't end up fighting the elements. If the weather arrives unscheduled on a particular day, I will reschedule the course at no charge. All right, okay. Good morning, Nigel. The sun's out, roads are wet, he says. Right, okay, so what next? Correlation and causation, two similar sounding words and two easily confused ideas. Correlation simply tells us that two variables move to the same pattern. And my favorite correlation is the revelation that more people drowned in swimming pools in the years that Nicolas Cage released new movies. Although it's always possible, I suppose, that people are drowning themselves because they hate his movies, it's not very likely, is it? So that's a correlation. Doesn't necessarily mean that there's a link between the movement of two sets of data. On the other hand, causation implies cause and effect. So, if you find more empty beer bottles in your trash can, it's almost certainly because you are drinking more beer. That's a causation. But if there's one area where causation and correlation get regularly confused, it's road safety. For example, travel data produced during the first week of the latest national lockdown, which comes from local authority data, suggested that traffic fell 27% below what they were pre-COVID back in early March. Now, what they pointed out was that that's only half the fall in traffic compared with the first lockdown earlier in the year. And some people have been using that to suggest that people haven't been obeying the new lockdown regulations. But of course, there are two rather simpler explanations. The first one is that this time around, schools, colleges, and universities have remained open, so there are people travelling to and from those places. And of course, the current regulations also allow for anyone who can't work from home and who isn't in one of the prescribed industries to actually carry on working at their normal location and to use, obviously, vehicles to commute and for business purposes. So simply counting numbers, and we have to be careful what conclusions we draw from those numbers. Right, okay. Still to come, I will be talking about some better biking skills. I'll be looking at riding in fog. Don't forget, you are watching Elevenses. Kevin Williams here, live with my show, which comes out on Wednesdays and Sundays. Don't forget, if you've got anything to say, questions, comments, anything you like to ask, I'm happy to try and answer. And if you've got any feedback on the show, I'm always welcome to hear that. And if you'd like anything covered, I'm always up to add something as well. So, okay, what next? Well, Transport for London have announced that they are going to be joining the e-scooter trial that's going on in various cities across the UK. All London boroughs will be involved, and that makes for what's claimed to be the biggest trial of e-scooters across the country. Now, TfL's launched a competition to select up to 3 operators for competition. I suspect that means lowest bidder. 12-month trial of these rental e-scooters, and if you remember correctly, the scooters can't be used on pavements but must be used on the road in cycle lanes, and you must have a provisional license as well. Trials are part of a wider plan to encourage greener forms of transport, etc., etc. London boroughs will control the parking locations, whilst authorities can also designate certain no-go areas. And these no-go areas will be strictly out of bounds for all these scooters. And what will happen is if you try to ride into them on one of these scooters, the scooter will slow down and stop. The geofencing technology can also be used to reduce speeds from their maximum 15 miles per hour down to 8 in go slow areas. Philip Glanville, who's the chair of the London Council's Transport and Environment Committee, said that the trials be regularly reviewed and that anyone invited to join the trial with scooters will need to demonstrate safety provisions. He said, "We're going ahead with this year-long trial to explore whether rented e-scooters could be a positive addition to London's transport network, complementing walking, cycling and public transport and supporting our citywide response to the coronavirus pandemic." You'll note that he doesn't cover private transport there. The total number of e-scooters has not yet been determined, but expect 60 to 150 per borough. Around a third of boroughs have currently expressed interest in taking part. Michael Hurwitz, who's the TfL Director of Transport Innovation, said safety will be a number one priority during the e-scooter rental trial. It will be critical to providing us with the data and insights we need to determine whether e-scooters are a viable part of a greener and healthier future for London. But they also warn that privately owned scooters will not be covered under the trial and will remain illegal. And London's police have already announced that don't put an e-scooter on your Christmas shopping list. And they remind people that outside of the trial scooters, the unregulated scooters are liable to be seized and the riders prosecuted for licence and insurance offences. Although, having looked out the window at the number of them being used around here, I suspect that cat is well and truly out of the bag already. Right, okay. So don't forget, we're going to finish off with the better biking tip, which is riding in fog today, but there's a bit of a link to this particular story as well, because I don't know about you, but one of the problems I find riding on foggy days, but also wet days, is over bright lights create a lot of glare, which actually makes it difficult to see. Now, way back in the mists of time, you may recall, halogen headlights were a new innovation. And someone somewhere decided that the best way to avoid these lights getting brighter and brighter, dazzling people, was to limit the current draw. Now, at the time, that probably made sense because that was the limit to the technology. But that's basically why we have a limit of 60, 55 watts on main and dip halogen bulbs. It's much easier to measure the current draw than it is to measure light output. That's probably why. Now, you could always buy off-road bulbs, which were brighter. And they drew down more current. I used to fit 180 watt bulbs to my courier bike simply because they gave me a bit of a an edge on an unlit road, because if you think about most motorcycles from a few years ago, they only ever had one headlight, which meant that they were a distinct disadvantage when you met a car coming the other way. Now, even though they were considerably brighter, they were not blinding, unless you forgot to dip, of course, in which case the driver coming the other way usually lets you know fairly quickly. But the real issue started to arise with the appearance of xenon HID headlights. Now, that stands for high intensity discharge, and they first appeared around 25 years ago now on high-end cars. And rather than using a glowing filament, which is what the halogen bulbs do, they actually create an electric arc, basically a controlled spark, which fires across between the two tungsten electrodes. The big plus was that they consume around half the power for the equivalent of a tungsten halogen light. Or to put it another way, what you could do is make much brighter headlights without breaking that 60-watt power draw. Now, that's fine when the lights are well controlled and they're directed away from your eyes. But of course, as soon as a car comes over a crest or around a bend or hits a bump, and particularly on dark, wet nights where the light simply bounces off the road surface anyway, you're blinded. Technology's moved on again, and in the last decade or so, LED headlights have started to replace HIDs on most cars, and they're coming to bikes as well. You get the similar kind of light improvement to an HID headlight, but they have big pluses. They're much more durable for starters than the HIDs, which turned out to fail fairly quickly, and the component costs dropped off dramatically as well. They're also significantly more energy efficient than HID or halogen bulbs, which basically means that you can cover your bike in LED lights without overloading the charging system. And of course, that's something that has appealed to a certain kind of rider who thinks that more lights must make them more visible. And of course, where there's a demand, somebody will actually find a way of tucking into it. So have a look at this. R&G, who you probably know better for providing crash protection, sort of crash bobbins, that kind of thing. They've just launched this new range. They're called their innovative T3 switchback turn signal. And they claim it's the brightest and most versatile aftermarket light on the market. Now, you're probably wondering what a switchback turn signal is. I was. So I read the description, and what they say is it blends white visibility lighting, red brake lighting, and amber turn signal lighting into one modular system. And the idea is that you can just use one signal pod for front and rear use. And they say the super bright white running lights switch to amber when the turn signal is activated for front mounting, obviously, whilst super bright red LEDs give you run and brake functionality and also switch to amber when the turn signal is activated. And they come with mounting kits which will allow you to cover your bike comprehensively. You can get them for mounting to handguards, front fenders, body panels, side and top cases, license plates and rear fenders, as well as crash bars. So you should be able to light yourself up like a Christmas tree. How bright? Well, shockingly bright, according to the press release. But two things to consider before you head out and turn your bike into a ball of fire. Is blinding other road users on wet nights really such a great idea? And just have a think about the price too, £120 per pod, which may well be enough to make you think twice. Okay, so still got the better biking tip to come at the end of the show. Don't forget that Elevenses runs at 11 on Wednesdays and Sundays. So I'll be happy to see you here again next week. And you can always catch up with the show you missed over on my YouTube channel at Survival Skills UK. All right. So earlier this week, Yamaha released a slew of press releases, rebranding, racing programs, confirmations of the 2001 model ranges, just in case you hadn't already heard about them. But tucked away at the bottom was the news confirming that some iconic models have been given the chop. Rather surprisingly, the rather nice and popular WR250R has gone. Now, I rode that bike out in California earlier this year. The VMAX is another victim, but frankly, I'm surprised that machine hadn't already gone away of the dinosaurs. It seems to have been around about as long as they have. Perhaps least surprisingly, in some ways, the YZF R6 is discontinued, except as a track-only machine. Why am I not surprised? Well, the simple answer is that the Super Sport 600 class of bikes has died a slow and lingering showroom death. Putting the R6 out of its misery only seems reasonable, doesn't it? At one time, the Super Sport 600 class dominated bike sales. From the moment Kawasaki created the class with their GPZ 600, and then Honda followed suit fairly rapidly with the CBR 600, that particular format of a 600cc inline 4, in a reasonably sharp handling package with decent performance, it fulfilled just about all the needs of the average rider. Jamie Whittam once said that 600 was all anyone would ever need on the streets. And the race replica styling, specifically the endurance racer on the road look, sold like hotcakes. So not surprisingly, Suzuki and Yamaha soon followed suit with their own take on the 600s. But one thing that the motorcycle industry has never been able to resist is an arms race. And so what happened was the jack of all trades sort of CBR style bike with a sporty edge went to a sports bike that was compromised for all but fast road riding. Over the years, I've ridden several iterations of the CBR, from the very first jelly mold up to the latest RR. And quite frankly, the original CBR was a rather nice, comfortable road bike. It's arguable that the final steel-framed model was the best of the bunch, and the final RR was so focused and uncomfortable, I was glad to get off it again. Yamaha followed a similar path, really. In 1990, earlier than 1999, 1999 is when the R6 came in. They introduced the Thundercat as a sort of an easy-to-ride sports bike, but the R6 always flirted with the track end of the spectrum. It was always a much more focused machine. But just like the rest of the class, it became even more track focused as the models ran on, and it lost any hint of the practicality that made that old CBR and the Thundercat as well so appealing. But the thing about arms races is eventually they become unsustainable. What happened with the bikes? Well, they got more and more trick bits thrown at them, upside down forks, adjustable suspension, radial brakes, you name it, it all started to appear. Quick shifters are probably the last thing that went on those bikes. And as the price rose, so the sales faded away. And I honestly cannot remember the last time I saw a brand new R6 on the road. I mean, it really is several years ago, I would suspect. I can't even remember seeing one recently with a sort of registration plate within the last 2 or 3 years. So the final manufacturer selling a 600 is the Kawasaki, but even that's based on a motor that first appeared in 2003. So they've hardly thrown pots of cash developing it. So what's selling now? Well, adventure sports. They're the new super sport bike, really, at least in terms of go anywhere, do anything performance. And at the more budget end of the market, manufacturers are cutting back on costs by cutting back on the number of cylinders. Yamaha are the most obvious exponents of this with the MT-09 and the MT-07, but Triumph did it as well when they brought in their triples. The Suzuki have just about given up completely with this mid-range class. They've just got the 650V twins, which are as old as the hills. And the sort of sole remaining bike with any kind of spiritual connection with the super sports bikes is Honda's CBR 650F. But how much longer is that going to be around? I don't know. There are 1 or 2 selling, but I don't see many. Okay, so as usual, I'll round off today with my final better biking tip. But don't forget, if you do find the whoops, that's the wrong picture. If you do find the tip useful, You can head over to my coffee page and you can pick up plenty of new, better riding articles over there. There's around 250 available at the moment, looking at all aspects of riding. And I put a bunch up yesterday, and you can also find some downloadable mini ebooks as well. They're not very expensive. So, right, it's the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. Well, that's what Keats said many years ago. I'm pretty sure he didn't ride a motorcycle, but he obviously appreciated the weather. Unfortunately, it's not often so motorcycle friendly out there as it is at the moment. It's not unusual this time of year for fog to develop, and fog can be a major biking problem. Now, probably we all know that fog forms when moist, warm air travels over cold ground, and we can encounter it at any time of the year, but it's particularly problematic around this point where warm air can still come up from the near continent over the warmer seas, but the land is cooling rapidly, so we can get fairly dramatic formations of fog around this point in time. Nights are longer, so it persists longer and can be really slow to clear. Now, I still remember 2 trips in fog actually quite vividly. The first one was on the way up to Heathrow area. I was actually heading over to a New Year's party, and I was riding up the A40. I needed to make it because I rode off the main carriageway onto a slip road and very nearly hit the Armco at the end of the slip road. Fortunately, because of the thick fog, I was only going very slowly, so I did actually manage to bring the bike to a stop, but that was a bit of a near miss. But if anything, I had a worse ride some years later when I was dispatch riding. I had to take a package from central London to GCHQ, which you probably know is out in Cheltenham. I picked the package up sometime early afternoon. It was a lovely, bright sunny day, cloudless skies, sun beating down, but cold. I got to Cheltenham just before the sunset, turned round and the sun was behind me, but already the fog was starting to form in the lower areas, and that ride got steadily worse and worse and worse, and it turned into a nightmare of thick freezing fog that was actually coating the outside of my visor because I couldn't see where I was going. There were accidents all over the place in the fog. There were traffic jams all over the place. I think it took me about 2.5 hours to get out there. I left Cheltenham, if I remember right, about 3:15, 3:30, just as the sun was going down. I think it was nearer 9 o'clock by the time I got back that night. So, I can honestly say that fog is not my favourite riding. So, rule 1, stay put if you can. Rule 2, if you can't do that, plan ahead. First thing to do is ensure the bike is actually easy to ride. A lot of us use a sort of rat bike for winter riding, but just make sure everything works. If all the cables are stiff, if the brakes are a bit iffy, or we're riding on cheap and nasty tyres, we're not going to be devoting all our attention to riding and dealing with the weather conditions. So get the bike into a good start. Clean and adjust headlights. It's amazing how dirty a headlight can get without you noticing it. You'll notice it when you clean the lens. And the other thing to do is, if the bike's a bit old, is actually pull the bulb out and get inside the reflector and actually clean the inside of the glass and clean the mirrored surface as well. You'd be amazed at how much difference that makes on an old motorcycle. Get the bulb adjusted properly. If it's too low, you won't get any forward vision. If it's too high, then even low beam will just bounce back in fog. And if you've got auxiliary lights, think about what they're doing too. Extra light just gets bounced back as extra glare if they are angled too high. Fog lights. We don't have fog lights on motorcycles, so maybe think about fitting one. That's something I did when I had my courier bikes out. Regularly just used to pop a bolt-on fog light on the back. It's much easier, of course, now there are LED lights as well. Remember that drivers will have problems seeing us if we don't have a fog light, but we should see their headlights in the mirrors if we keep an eye on them. Finally, on that sort of front, don't rely on high-vis kit either. People think, oh, I've got my high vis on, people will see me. Well, first things first, have a think about the colours. Yellow blends in rather nicely with fog. You just don't pick it up very well at all. And reflective material, which is often up over the shoulders, round the back, simply isn't going to work when everybody's on dip beam, is it? So your reflective material needs to be low down to be seen. So conventional high vis doesn't work on a foggy day. But we need to see. So think about vision. I've already just the other day mentioned wax polish to help the water bead off. It works best in rain, but it does work reasonably well with fog. The droplets, tiny droplets of fog, start to bead up, and then a turn of the head will tend to sweep them clear. But don't wipe visors with fingers. That just smears it and makes it almost impossible to see out. Helmets tend to fog up as well internally. I've never yet found a helmet with a demisting system that works as it's supposed to. Breath deflectors that you either fit inside the helmet or actually wear as a mask, they can help a bit. But the best way to go is to an anti-fog treatment on the visor itself. Now, you can either buy visors with a factory anti-fog, which seem to work reasonably well when they're new, but that kind of soon seems to wear off, in my experience, and you are paying quite a lot of money for it. Or you can use a sort of anti-mist treatment. You can get various little spray cans and pots of rub-on gloop, and they all work reasonably well, but they do need regular reapplication. I just used to use Fairy Liquid. It was cheap and it was very easy to apply. Just a dab of it on a clean cloth, polish it in, and then you've got an anti-mist visor. It'll last a few hours before it sort of dribbles off. So if you ride for an hour to work and an hour to back, you may have to reapply it at work. But if you're doing short trips, it should be good enough. More expensive option is the double glazing from something like a Fog City shield. Some riders swear by them. I swear at them. I find they reduce visibility at night. I used one very briefly and took it off again. I also found that the constant cleaning necessary, even the inside of a visor gets dirty in London. It just scratched the Fog City, so I'm afraid I ditched them very quickly. But as I say, if you're doing a lot of short rides, they could be the answer. They don't seal well on some visors. There's a bit of a knack to it. Sometimes you'll find a friendly dealer will do it for you. Anything else to think about? Well, it's cold riding in fog thanks to the chill air, but also because of those tiny droplets which get into your clothing and then suck your body heat away. So you probably will need waterproofs. Even if you've got a waterproof jacket on, putting an extra layer over the top helps keep that water from penetrating into the outer fabric. And consider heated clothing. That's something else I covered just recently on Elevenses. Next stop before you go out is weather forecast. Just have a look and see what's likely to happen. It's pretty obvious if you wake up in fog, but bright sunny daylight today. If it stays clear, I could expect fog later on during the day. And think about where it'll form on your ride. Generally, towns tend to stay clear, not always, but it's the surrounding countryside that tends to be worse. Fog can be caused by several different weather conditions. It could be low cloud, so you'll get fog on mountaintops, for example. Even fairly small hills can disappear into the cloud in midwinter. It can be driven in off the sea if you've got cold coastal waters. So North Sea is pretty well known for that. Even Kent gets very foggy from the North Sea fogs. Or midwinter, still cool evenings, then it forms where the cold air sinks. So it's usually the low-lying areas where you'll get the fog in on those kind of days if the sky is clear. So that's damp meadows and river valleys, particularly places to watch out for. Couple of tips: watch out for patchy fog because you don't know where it is, how thick it is, or how long it'll last. It's easy to blast into what looks like a wispy bit of mist and find that suddenly you can't see anything. Normally it's easy to see oncoming cars, but bear this in mind: you will struggle to spot a car sideways on in a junction. You can normally see the tail lights of cars ahead, but don't follow the bloke ahead. If they run off the road, so will you. And don't forget, fog also makes the surface wet, so following close enough to see the tail lights might seem like a great idea, but is that giving you enough stopping distance? One major problem with fog is that you kind of get dislocated. all the normal visual cues that we use on the road will vanish. So use everything available. Remember reflective posts. Red ones are to the right of our line of, now I'll start that again. Red ones are to the left of our line of travel because they represent the tail light of a parked car. White ones are to the right of our line of travel because they would represent the lights of an oncoming vehicle. So remember that, and it will help you locate where the road's going ahead. Use warning signs. They're reflective, so they often show up even in fog. They'll show up probably long before we can see the hazard they're telling us about. Watch out for the cat's eyes and the hazard lines too. Cat's eyes get closer together, just like the hazard line gets longer and the gaps get shorter. Coloured cat's eyes can help as well. Remember again where they are. Red to the left, white to the between the lanes, and green ones where you can come off a road or rejoin it, so slip roads. As a rule, I tend to ride out towards the centre line now rather than follow the left edge of the road, partly because of that experience I mentioned early on when I ran off into a slip road and nearly hit the Armco, but also because I also discovered, of course, that you might find an unlit parked car. People will park on a nice clear evening, and you'll discover their unlit car in the fog a bit later on. So being more central keeps you away from hazards like that. It also gets you away from bicycles that you may not see. But do be cautious. There may be unlit traffic islands in the middle of the road, but they should be marked out with cross-hatched white paint markings. Riding in fog is never fun, but these little tips can help you make it a bit less stressful. There's more about riding in difficult conditions generally in my Tarmac Tactics paperback. You can order that from my Lulu website, which you will find here. And if you head over to my Ko-fi page, as I said, there are some mini ebooks over there, inexpensive ones, which will deal with specific problems, including some topics of riding in bad weather. So you can go over there and have a look for those as well. All right, that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I trust I will see you again on Wednesday. Thanks for looking in, and bye for now.